Welcome to Calm Your Caveman, a podcast where we study the tools for anxiety mastery. I'm your host, Dr. Adriana Jarvis Twitchell, a specialist in anxiety mastery strategies. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I have been promising for some time now that we would have an episode where we would examine what nature does to our anxiety, how time in nature affects our well-being. Well, this is the episode where we're going to do that. And luckily, we have expert help. We have a special guest interview with Dr. Christopher Minson. He is the Kenneth M. and Kenda H. Singer Endowed Professor of Human Physiology at the University of Oregon. He's been performing research on human adaptations to environmental extremes, biomarkers of cardiovascular health, and autonomic vascular regulation for over 24 years at the University of Oregon. He has been consistently funded through the National Institutes of Health, the American Heart Association, and numerous other funding programs. Dr. Minson is co-director of the Exercise and Environmental Physiology Labs and a founder of the Bowerman Sports Science Center. He is also the chief science officer and co-founder of the company NatureQuant, which is a technology company at the intersection of human health and the environment. He has studied in depth the research that teaches us about how nature affects our well-being. So that's why I'm really excited to present to you this interview with Dr. Christopher Minson. Well, thanks so much for being willing to talk to us today. And I'm really interested in your perspective because I know that you're an expert on the effects of nature on our well-being. And I want to specifically ask you about how nature, time in nature, affects anxiety and depression.
Great. Sure. Yeah. I'm happy to speak on that. I mean, interesting enough, I'm a physiologist more than a psychologist. I had my undergrad in psychology, but that didn't get me very far other than being a stepping stone to physiology. So I do look a lot at the physiological responses to environmental exposure, to natural environments, those kind of things. And I wear two hats. I'm a professor at University of Oregon as well as a co-founder of a company called NatureQuant, which we're kind of focused on these topics we're talking about today. Yeah, so what's interesting to me right now is that the research so much backs up which makes sense to us. Like it should be inherently obvious to us that nature is healthy, right? Humans have, since we evolved from living in oceans as single-celled organisms, we've been exposed to the environment around us entirely. And so it makes sense that we are going to have to relate to our environment and be response to our environment and get benefits from our environment in all its different forms. And so to me, it's always interesting when the research is coming out, and there's literally hundreds and hundreds now of papers that are backing this up in various forms, that exposure to nature is very, very healthy for us from both psychological, mental health side of things, and both in a physiological side as well. Despite that, people are still spending, 10 hours a day or more on screens. Children are spending 96% of their time indoors. So it's a problem. It's a disconnect, right? There's a logical side of it, which is nature's good for us. Nature's healthy. And then the research, I've been a scientist for 30 years now or something like that. And oftentimes there's something that seems so obvious and the research doesn't back it up. This is one where the research clearly makes a point that this is healthy for us. And yet there's still a massive disconnect with what people are doing.
Yeah. And I'm wondering why it is that we're so unaware of the effects that nature has on us. I guess it doesn't really matter why. What matters is the research that's telling us, right, that it's important. So in our modern day environment, we're spending a lot of time on screens, like you mentioned, a lot of time inside. So what links do you see between the rising trends in anxiety in the Western world and reduced time spent in nature?
Right. Yeah. And I do actually think that the why is important still, why we're having these disconnects. And, one thing that's difficult is humans have these very large brains. we're very complex creatures, but can also be easily manipulated to some degree, right? Meaning, there are very smart people who are putting together programs and onto screens and other things to draw you in, to keep you attentive to that, to keep you scrolling. Now, I am an open book on most things, and I will admit to sometimes getting on TikTok and actually sometimes really enjoying being on TikTok. And there is something in there and other social media aspects as well that make you want to stay on it. It's like you click something and something else pops up. Instantly, it's interesting to you. So there's people out there who have, for their jobs and for their own level of creativity, have hacked our brains to keep us attentive to those things. Then the other social media side of this, right, which creates a lot of stress, especially in teenagers and young individuals. But I'd say it goes all the way up to older individuals as well. So across the age spectrum, this is going on. And unfortunately, people younger and younger are getting on screens. So there's all this, there's competing aspects to it for sure. The other aspect of it, I think, is that, historically our green spaces have been decreasing. As more and more people move to cities and more and more cities want to have dense housing and other things that are really important for us as a species at the population we have to survive. We have to kind of have these things, but it's difficult because we're removing ourselves away from nature, right? And there's a lot of kids who don't get exposed to nature, or even maybe a city park on occasion, but maybe once in a while. A lot of playgrounds in schools don't have really green spaces anymore because they're hard to maintain, they're expensive to maintain. So we've been, we're just living in places where there's less access to it. So there's a lot of reasons why I think why we're not getting into nature, and it's clearly a problem. Again, knowing that something is good for us and healthy for us is very, very important, right?
Yeah.
We know about healthy eating habits. We know about healthy sleep habits. We know, a lot of these things. And yet people oftentimes don't follow them because it's difficult. We are busy. We get caught up in things, it's just challenging. I have 2 kids myself, and I know when my kids were young, boy, they dominated my wife's and my time just because there's so much going on, right? So it's difficult. It's difficult to try and make the time, but it's time that we need to do that. And even small breaks into nature can make a very big difference, right? There's been some studies like, if you want to talk about productivity, for instance, at work, that's a major one. There's a very simple study done on a bunch of Australian students where they were basically had to do this kind of mindless task of whenever something flashes on the screen, they'd push a button and then they count how many times they make mistakes. And so it's kind of a mindless task, kind of boring, but it's work. It was something they were trying to do.
Yeah.
And then, those who take like 40-second breaks every now and then looked at a flowering roof, roof with flowers on it versus a concrete roof, over time made a lot fewer errors, right? And so there's this the simple breaks like that. Some things that we're really pushing a lot is trying to get everybody to get 20 minutes into some kind of explicit nature every day if they can, at least 4 or 5 times a week if possible. Because if you go into a natural environment, especially a park or a green space, if you're on a tree-lined street, it's better than being on a street with no trees, for sure. There's some benefits that trees have for us, both visually, autistically, audially, as well as the smells and other things too. But if you can just get outside for in some kind of hopefully explicit nature, a park or something like that, and you don't have your cell phone with you, right? If you bring your cell phone with you, these benefits oftentimes are not seen. Or at least not looking at, have it in your pocket, have it turned off. Within 20 minutes, your blood pressure drops, your stress hormone drops, right? Your levels of cortisol drops. Your other stress hormones, epinephrine and norepinephrine, they drop. All these things happen relatively quickly, and that can really reset us to some degree, and both physiologically and mentally. And I'm a physiologist, but I am such a huge believer that there's this brain-body connection. You can't separate the two. Our body can impact our brain can impact our body. And so we can talk more in detail on these things, but there's some small things we can do per day, even if you can't fully get out into nature on a regular basis.
Yeah, so you're talking about an almost immediate effect, 20 minutes and already the cortisol levels drop. Do you know long term? For example, for the rest of the day, does it endure? Is it something that we just have to repeat all the time? Does it create lasting change of any kind? What are the effects there?
Sure. It's interesting. So that's always a really good and important question, right? Because it's like, I'm an exercise physiologist. I do a lot of heat therapy and cold therapies for people, as well as nature exposures.
Mm-hmm.
And I always kind of get the questions like, well, if I do it once, how long does it last, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a great question, and it's a fair question. And I wish we could say, oh, you just do it once and you're done, you're good, high five, go about your day, you're done for the week, done for the month. Unfortunately, more is better, right? And to an extent. And so definitely, if you there's been studies have shown that if you go outside for a 20-minute walk in a natural area versus if you go out a 20-minute walk in and done this people with major depressive disorder and other things who are institutionalized, and then they can go out one direction and look in a very green area versus go out in an urban walk.
Mm-hmm.
So they're both walking same distance, same everything, but seeing very different experiences in those cases. They're throughout the day, the rest of the day, and even into the following week, if they're doing this, they have increased levels of reported happiness. Their positive affect is higher. Their symptoms and signs of depression decrease. Right. So there's definitely a lasting benefit that goes throughout the day and can actually last a bit longer than that.
Mm-hmm.
But then, of course, if you don't do it again, then you can be right back in the same pattern you've been before and repeating that pattern. And so,
mm-hmm.
So that's kind of all I'd call it, kind of the acute effects, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get exposed, and then how long does it last throughout that day, maybe for a couple days. But then there's a chronic exposure. There's been a lot of studies also about where you live and how much of a green space, or people are also looking at blue spaces, which include access to oceans and rivers and other things,
mm-hmm.
Which are very important and healthy as well. But most of the work's been on green spaces, and shown that even when researchers do these big studies, whether it's epidemiological or whether it's health outcome data on thousands and thousands of patients, where you live makes a very big difference. They try and take into consideration racial and ethnic and socioeconomic and other types of impact factors that may play into this. People live in traditionally redlined areas that have been marginalized for years, and lack of investments and those kind of things. Mm-hmm. They try and take into consideration all those. And when you do these kind of very large studies and very complex studies, the thing that rings out very clearly is that those who live in greener spaces, have more access to green space around their home, have better health, right? They've got less rates of depression, lower rates of early mortality and cardiovascular disease and diabetes, all these kind of things. Like there's a study in children, for instance, and those who lived, again, taking consideration as much as they can as these other co-founders, potentially, they found that over time, these children who lived in greener areas had much lower risk of many psychiatric disorders, depression, mood disorders, schizophrenia, eating disorders, substance abuse. All these things were lower in these kids. And the argument can be made that, well, you live in a nice neighborhood, it's greener, it's prettier, it's probably wealthier, there's other aspects to it. But they tried to take in consideration all those type of things, and the nature is still a big factor in that.
Wow. So what have you specifically seen, since my listeners are concerned mostly about anxiety? You'd mentioned stress reduction, immediate stress reduction, but have you seen other things that specifically show some kind of effect on anxiety levels in people?
Yeah. So within the research, there's quite a bit of things. Again, I'm not being a legit psychologist by any means. I have looked more at rates of depression and mood disorder, mm-hmm. and numbers of major depressive responses, those kind of things. Again, I haven't looked at that research myself. I haven't done that research myself, but been peripherally involved in some of the studies and certainly pay attention to it. So, I can't speak to all the details about what's happening in the mental health side of things. Other than that, things that are reported are reports of happiness increase. Mm-hmm. Subject well-being, measures of positive affect are higher. being in nature can help create positive social interactions as well, especially if you're in a neighborhood and you get to know people and see people, or you go with other people. Those kind of things can have very big effects. There's other things that people have reported, which include just decrease overall mental stress as a general term, but also, and I can't get to the root of this, but a sense of meaningfulness or purpose in their life. The reports of these measurements increase as people get more nature exposure, take time to be in nature, or again, living in greener areas that have better access.
Interesting. And I'm wondering if part of this has to do with, when people are outside, often they're moving, they're exercising. Do you think that it's partly just because it's in tandem with that, or is there just an effect of just sitting out there in a green space?
There's just an effect of sitting out there, but again, as a trained exercise physiologist, I always think there's massive benefits to moving your body, getting right. But there's a practice that is in Japan, and Japan did some very interesting studies. The country of Japan, the government of Japan, and they started something called forest bathing, or shinrin yoku, and that really is the practice of just going out to a natural area and sitting quietly. And they did this early study where they created this place and encouraged people to do it, and then the benefits were so profound that they started investing in making in every major city that they can to put these parks and other places where people can go, and to make it part of their practice of their country, right? Of the populace. So now Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing, is very popular there, very common there. And so it's just being in nature has an impact. There's a psychologist here, a neuroscientist here at the University of Oregon named Richard Taylor, and he's looked at just fractal patterns. So, fractal patterns are repeating patterns in nature. So you think of a tree branch and how it splits, and it follows these patterns, and nature's always in these repeating patterns. And he's shown that that people have this a more relaxed state just by seeing these fractal patterns. And we don't really get that in built environments. It's really in natural environments where we see that. So, believe it or not, there's even people have had different screensavers, right? If you have a screensaver that has a green open space, people tend to be a little bit more productive. Hospitals have shown that if you have a view of nature from your hospital bed, the number of hospital days stays are shorter, right? So there's, we can get into whether, these immersive electronic worlds, the meta universe, and those kind of things. Is it possible we can get some benefits? It's probably better than looking at just being online in screens. But there shows some benefit on psychological profiles for people who are experiencing those. I would still argue any day of the week that being in actual nature is better, because you're going to see true fractal patterns. You're going to see true experiences. You're hearing the sounds. It's all part of this biophilia hypothesis, which is, that humans we grew up in natural environments, and we seek out natural environments and social interactions in natural environments. So it's all part of that, I think. And so it's an exciting time to be looking into this, and I'm hoping that we can make a lot more impacts for people.
Interesting. Yeah, we actually talked about Richard Taylor's research a little bit on a former episode. I
great.
found it was really interesting what he had found about the fractal patterns. But it makes sense what you say, that it's even more impactful if you're actually out there with the full body experience, not just seeing fractal patterns, but you're hearing, you're smelling, you're feeling the breeze. All of these things probably have impacts on our experience, I'm sure.
Sure. Yeah, I'm like as a physiologist, and I have a lot of titles, I guess you can say, but I'm very much an environmental physiologist. So one of the things I study is making people uncomfortable. And, Michael Easter wrote a great book called The Comfort Crisis. And I think he's really onto something in the sense that, if we're indoors all the time and we can perfectly control our environment, and then we get into our cars and we control that environment, and we go to work and that's a controlled environment. I never want to be hot. I never want to be cold. I don't want to feel a breeze in myself. I don't want, right? That's not how humans evolved. That's not how any animal evolved. And so, a large part of what my research is we're pushing people. We're making them hot. We're making them cold. And people don't like it oftentimes. People don't like to exercise because it's hard. I'm breathing hard. I'm sweating and these kind of things. But those healthy stressors are very, very healthy for us, right? So going outside, being in nature, my wife, I think, wants to leave me pretty much multiple times every day, where we'll go outside and we're going to go for a walk, and she starts grabbing a sweater. Oh, it's not. Just don't bring a sweater. Don't bring a sweater. And she's outside, and she'll be like, "I'm kind of cold," and I'll say, "Well, you're not really cold. You just feel the cold." Right, you're feeling the cold. Your body temperature hasn't dropped. It's not. You're not cold. And she's like, "Oh my gosh, just stop it." Right. But I do believe though that having that sensation of being outside, feeling a little bit cold, feeling a little bit warm, these are healthy things for us to do. And then when you come back in and you're back in your comfortable house and you're like, "Wow, that was nice. I was outside." Right. I got that brisk feeling. I think that plays into it as well. So the lived experience is important in my view.
That's interesting, because I think especially in places where the winters are kind of harsh, people have a tendency to not want to go outside during the winter, and then their mental health just kind of goes in a downward spiral. It's interesting to think that the uncomfortable experience of being outside in the cold has some health benefits in and of itself, and makes me think of some other work by other psychologists that talk about when we constantly seek comfort, we become more sensitive to pain, and it bothers us more. So and conversely, if we're having uncomfortable experiences, then we're able to tolerate pain more. Kind of strange.
I agree 100%, right? Completely. There's been studies on elite athletes, for instance, right? That their tolerance to pain is much higher than the average person. And then people say, "Oh, well, they were born that way, therefore they could push themselves." But that's not being backed up by research, and it's showing that as you train, as you get more exposure, the more you do it, it just becomes part of what you experience, and your response to your mental side response to that discomfort changes. Your acceptance of that discomfort changes. And so, I 100% agree with you, and it's a very interesting component of the human condition.
Yeah, and I think it has some bearing on anxiety, because I think that those of us who are anxious, we're easily triggered by lots of different things. If we could get so that we weren't so easily triggered, then we would have a little bit more of an even keel experience. So this idea of the pain threshold, I think, is pertinent to anxiety too. Let me ask you about, then you mentioned a little bit about getting small doses of nature. What dose should we be looking for? Is it just the more the better, or do we just need to find an amount that we can somehow fit into our routine? What should we be aiming for?
Right. Yeah. So the some is good for sure. Right. There's been is it kind of like I kind of think of this a little bit as like the 10,000 steps idea, right? This whole push that people say, "Oh, if you get 10,000 steps a day, that's what your target is. You want to get healthy," right? If you're doing 6,000 steps a day, that's a heck of a lot better than doing 10 steps a day or 100 steps a day, right? If you get 10,000, does it mean, boom, I'm done? 12,000, 14,000 won't be better, right? There's a point where too much is too much, of course. Mm-hmm. But there's been some early studies trying to get this for nature exposure. And the number that's kind of been thrown around is if you can get 120 minutes, so essentially 2 hours per week, that's kind of like a place in which you kind of build up to that point, and at that point you see a little bit more of a plateau in the benefits, if you will. Again, this is very difficult to study, and I don't know if I'd fully agree with that, but if people can try and get 120 minutes per week, that would be a great goal. If they're only getting 90, that's great. If it's getting them out more often than they would, that's great. And the idea again is to say not just go outside and be like, "Oh, I'm outside," and you're surrounded by a concrete jungle, you're right outside a coffee shop. I mean, that's greater than being inside, right? And being on screens for sure. But it's really trying to get out to a natural environment, trying to find a park nearby. If you have a lovely backyard and it's gorgeous and you've got, there's health benefits to that as well, for sure. So, the idea then is to try and get that explicit time in some kind of nature. There is a neuroscientist, I believe she's at Northeastern University in the United States, Rachel Hopman, and she kind of came up with this nature for mental health approach, and she calls it the 25-3 rule. And that's the goal is to try and get into a natural environment for 20 minutes at least 3 times a week, because of 20 minutes 3 times a week. And, it's not quite getting you to that 120 minutes, but it's getting you at least 60 minutes, and hopefully you can do more than that. That's a minimum. And then try and spend 5 hours per month in a semi-wild environment. So that means try and get into more of a state park or somewhere that's just more, or a very big city park. You can do it as well with a lot of nature around, just kind of things. But if you can get into kind of natural environment, a true natural wild environment, 5 hours per month, and then try and get 3 days, it's a 25-3 rule, 3 days per year where you really go off grid, where you can shut down, you at least get off get completely away from social media and emails and work related things. The idea of that be camping or hiking and somewhere, or backpacking or those kind of things. You don't bring your electronics with you. So I think Dr. Hopman, are those the perfect numbers? Who knows, right? It's hard to know, but I think that she's right on the right track of trying to get people to think, all right, 20 minutes at least 3 times a week would be a great baseline. 5 hours per month, try and get somewhere into a more natural environment, and then 3 days per year. It's not a big ask, right? Try and get completely off grid and away from all those kind of things, and that's a good pathway to mental health.
So it sounds like she's also trying to help us recognize that there's good, better, and best. It's good to be outside in a park. It's better to be outside in a wild environment, and it's best to be somewhere where you are away from civilization. You don't have your phone and you're fully immersed. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that for sure. Yes, 100%. Yep. I will say that it's challenging depending on where you live and what your access to nature is. If you have to take buses to try and get out there versus you can drive out there, or you have to or it's socioeconomic status has real big impacts on this. And the thing about wild nature, I'm very, very comfortable being very far in the deep woods, in the mountains by myself, because I grew up that way. My dad was a climber and outdoor adventurer, and so I just started that way from very young. But then you take kids who live in inner cities, right? And almost everything you see in the movies with nature, it's almost always going to be people go out in nature and something attacks them. So there's these fears that people have, and I think for the most part, extreme unrealistic fears about wild nature and the wilderness and how scary it can be. And so I think that there's programs that are trying to get inner city kids more so into these natural environments and have fun in these areas and see that they're safe and those kind of things. And so it's easy for me to sit back and say, oh, just go in the wilderness, no electronics for 3 days. That's like it's my dream. And whereas others, it's their nightmare. So I think it's just there's a lot of re-education we have to do to remind people that this is where we came from.
Yeah, I think that word re-education is maybe really appropriate, because I think that maybe those who have grown up in cities, like you've said, and haven't had a lot of contact with nature, when they go out into a forest and there's bugs and you just don't know what all these noises are, and it can feel triggering for people that have anxiety sometimes, but maybe it's just a matter of getting used to it, knowing that it's good for us and that we should try and get used to it.
Absolutely, yes. And knowing the strategies, right? I can't say I have a love of bugs. I find them fascinating, but I will say that, boy, I have been in situations where I have been just pestered incessantly by biting flies and mosquitoes. I put myself in these kind of positions, and there are times where I am just going crazy. But then the thing is that, you look back and you kind of laugh at it a little bit, or you realize, okay, I should have been better prepared. There's ways to be in nature and not have the impacts of these so much, right? So it's just a matter of getting that experience. And I do feel that when we overcome something, right, that's such a good psychological boost for us, right? That okay, it wasn't exactly comfortable the whole time, right? I was sleeping on the hard ground, or we had to go with all these black flies or mosquitoes or whatever they happen to be. But I got through it, and that makes my having to respond to these 50 emails quite a bit easier. It's like I'm sitting here in a comfortable chair answering emails, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's something to that.
Right. And increased productivity thereafter. So that's always good, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And dealing with people, right? If you like, I know that I think a lot of mental health problems come for people from their social interactions or lack of social interactions, other things. And so if you overcome challenges, then it's easier to work with or manage challenging people, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I'd like to ask you a little bit about Nature Quant, which is a business that you started. Maybe you could tell us about what it is and what motivated you to start it. Give us some information about it.
Sure. Yeah. Nature Quant was really the brainchild, if you will, of our CEO, Jared Hanley. He's a kind of a data scientist, usually working in the financial world. But he's also, he and I and our other co-founder, Chris Bailey, who's our technology expert, we're all outdoor adventurers, and we were friends doing, backcountry skiing and climbing and biking and other kind of trips. And Jared was just at one point, outside, just feeling like, I just feel so good when I'm outside, and I feel so much more awake and so much more alert and so much more productive when I come back from being outside. Why is that? He started kind of looking into what is the science behind nature and health, and he opened this door up, saying, "Wow, there's tons of research on this. I hadn't heard about this, and we're outdoor people. You'd think we'd be aware of this stuff, right?" And so he approached myself as a physiologist, and he approached Chris Bailey, who's he had he worked in technology and tech companies for a very long time, had some big successes there. And so, brought us kind of three together and said, I got this vision of maybe using data and trying to understand how it impacts our health. And so the North Star of our company really is to try and get people to appreciate nature and value nature. And if we do that, then and appreciate the health benefits of being in nature. And if we do that, then people are going to hopefully value it more. When we can appreciate something, then we're going to invest in it more. If we invest in it more, we can protect more areas and have more investment in environmental projects and other things to save the environment. And what's interesting for us is that people like to quantify things. It's easier for us to have value in something if we quantify it. So that's where Nature Quant came about. We're quantifying nature. So we really have two main tools. We have a slew of other products and other things, but the two ones we have are, one's called Nature Score, which is where we've gone through and for all of North America, and we're working right now on Europe and I'll be working on trying to get the whole world at some point, where we have used 25, 30 different generally publicly available data sources to try and quantify the health benefits of nature around you. Mm-hmm. So from any if you're living in North America right now, for instance, you can put any address in and onto our website at naturequant.com, and then you can put that in, and that will give you your nature score for that area. And that's taking a whole bunch of different factors: the green space, blue space, impervious surfaces like concrete surfaces, air quality, sound quality, all these kind of many different factors, right? That we've compiled for that location. And that gives you, and so a lot of scientists and researchers are now using this data for their own research, see where people live, where they're spending time, those kind of things. By way of example, Arbor Day Foundation, a very large nonprofit here in the United States that works around the world really, but is about trying to plant more trees, and they're using a lot of our tools to decide where should they plant trees, where can they have the biggest impact on people's health, especially if they look at the traditionally marginalized communities. Where can they invest in planting trees to have some impact of health? The other product we have that is a free app. Again, working right now in North America, we're working to expand it. But it's basically it runs in the background of your phone. You have to have the location data on there, location tracking on there, and it's just go about your day. It just it's using our Nature Score platform to then track you throughout the day and seeing how much nature exposure you're getting. This could be tree-lined streets. Did you actually go into a park? And it quantifies, again, how much nature time you got. So if you're in downtown city and you do a 20-minute walk and there's not many trees, it's a pretty built environment, but you're outside at least, then in that 20-minute walk, you might get 6 or 7 minutes of nature dose, meaning you got some exposure to nature dose, but it wasn't 100%. But if you go to an actual city park, then for every 20 minutes you're in that park, you're getting 20 minutes of nature dose. So it's a way to people to quantify, and people have been using it, find it really helpful in the sense, like, I'm a perfect example. I'm an outdoors person. I'm always trying to do things. There are times I go back, I'm like, let me check my nature dose and see where I am. And I realize that I have like gone almost a full week and I've got, 30 minutes, 40 minutes of nature. And that's, and I'm like, that is crazy, right? So it's a good motivator for me. Like, okay, this weekend I've got to plan some time to be outside. I got to go to a park. I've got to go for a little hike, something like that, because I know my health benefits. I've seen it. I wear an Oura ring on my finger. That the main reason why I wear this really is to track my sleep, and I see that these little things I do make a difference in my sleep, not just the quantity, but the quality, the sleep architecture.
Wow.
If I'm not going outside much and getting that nature exposure, then my sleep is disrupted. Even if I feel like I slept the same, I could see my sleep quality was way down.
Mm-hmm.
So we started those tools really just to try and get people to appreciate and understand and value nature, and also use it as a personal tool for themselves.
Yeah, and it seems like it's good for helping people just be conscious of how much time they are or aren't spending outside. And also, I like that you kind of have a goal for people, right? You kind of help them aim toward that healthy dose, at least the minimum.
Absolutely, yep.
Minimum healthy
Yep.
dose.
And people can set their own dose. Like I have mine set for 120 minutes, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people set it for 60 or 90 minutes to try and get that dose.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the trick is that 90 minutes is not 90 minutes, right? Unless you're in a very lush, nature-rich area.
Mm-hmm.
So getting 90 minutes is harder than just saying, I was outside for 90 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, to your point, 100%. Our goal is to try and help people, give them the tools, have them set these things that are backed up by research and science that say these are the healthy thresholds you want to get to, and this is how you can positively impact your life through these. And we're fully aware that we're using technology and phones and other things to try and get people to nature. We realize that's a very strange juxtaposition, I guess you can say, or contrast. But we have to meet people where they are. Right?
Mm-hmm. People
are going to have their phones. We're going to have it on. And so the nice thing when we designed the app is that you can't be there and walking around in nature and going, oh, I'm at 18 minutes. Oh, I'm at 19 minutes, right? It won't, until you get back to internet and you're out of the natural places, it's not going to calculate your score. So you can't. So the idea is put your phone away, keep it away, don't look at it. Nature dose is not going to show you anything while you're there. So put it away. And then it will calculate it when you're back. So you get, it updates it when it can. We had talked a long time ago about saying, well, we should really try and hack the phones where people then are checking emails. I'm like, but that's getting a little too Big Brother creepy for our taste for sure. So we didn't want to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
But I like how I think the hardest thing for anyone when we're talking about changing behaviors is creating a new habit, right? And because our brains don't like to do something that we're not used to doing because it takes more energy. But with this app, it sounds like you've just made it really quantifiable. First of all, it's easy for us to tell what our goal is and to track where we are in relation to that goal. And it doesn't sound overwhelmingly hard, to get that amount of time. And it helps us to, I don't know, it just gives us that little step-by-step easy road to getting a new habit, what it seems like to me.
I agree completely. Absolutely. Right. And what I always want to tell people, and this is like, do as I say, not as I do type thing. I always want people to not beat themselves up and give themselves a hard time If they don't make that goal for a week, then if you don't, then you just take a mental note. Okay, I didn't get as much nature dose or time outside that I wanted to. Same with exercise. Everybody has these ups and downs, but I'm going to spend a little more time. I'm going to make a conscious effort to make it happen. And like you said, that is habit producing, especially when we feel there are benefits to it, and we're not beating ourselves up for not making these targets. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I preach this to people. I preach to my kids and my family and everything else. And then I don't live it myself. I'm really, really hard on myself. So I'm my own worst enemy. So but I'm trying to be kinder, gentler to myself as I've gotten older.
Good. Well, I'm glad that we can have this little time to tell people, first of all, about why it's so important that we spend more time in nature, but also to give them this tool that'll help them to take that step toward getting more of it in their lives. Because it's one thing to know that you need to do something. It's another thing to have some kind of system in place that makes it easier. And so I think that both of these things have been really helpful for us. I just want to thank you for taking the time to explain the research to us a little bit and to share your products with us. Tell us where we can find your app and your other products.
Sure. Again, unfortunately, our app is really available in North America right now through the U.S., either the Apple App Store or the Android App Stores. So they're in both forms of there. So it should work for almost any phone. And again, we're working on a project right now, and hopefully for the next year or so, we'll have all of at least Western, if not most of Europe, mapped and done. And so we'll also be hopefully getting the rest of the world as well. That's the plan. So you can find, it's just called Nature Dose. So think about how much nature, how you're dosing your nature, how much are you getting. So you'll find Nature Dose very easily there. And then if you want to look at our website, we have a lot of information on there. We've got a lot of kind of keep it updated with recent research publications and other things that we're working on. And that's just at our naturequant.com. So again, quantifying nature, naturequant.com. You can find it in both places, on the app as well as online. You can put your address in and see what your nature score is for that area. So they're fun. They're fun tools, and we think they're very important tools. And we're hoping that for greater adoption of them by various groups, people. Again, with that North Star of saying, well, people are going to value nature and appreciate nature. They're going to protect nature and hopefully expose themselves and get the health benefits of nature.
Great. Yeah, and we'll put links to those in the show notes as well. But thanks so much for taking the time to educate us a little bit more about the importance of time in nature.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on. It's really wonderful to speak with you.
Thanks for joining me today. If you feel like you'd benefit from individual anxiety coaching, you can look me up on my website, calmyourcaveman.com. If you'd like to support this podcast, you can do that by subscribing to Calm Your Caveman on YouTube and also on your favorite podcast platform. And if you want to help other people find this podcast, leaving a good review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify really helps. Thanks, and see you next time.